We've got Paige, Phoenix Risen, Squavi, L'Oreal, Ziziva, Scott Miller, Kiwi, Exena, Rabbit, Terrafail, Pochu, Thoakenum, Lutra, Caver, and Cave Woman. And in the back behind Caver is newcomer ZZ4. Tonight's story is brought to you in part by mistlore.com for some of the history, dpwr.net for the Denis dates, uruarchives.com for the surface history corresponding to the Denis dates, and the Cavernian Calendar Converter, which was written by Brett Middleton of the Fuzzy Physics Institute for converting between Denis and surface time. Tonight's story is from Myst, the Book of Atris. As I've told these stories, we have learned about life in the cavern. We learned how the Denis came from their proud roots, seeking to shed their pride, yet pride crept back into their lives. We watched it cause the downfall of their great empire. We watched as a mother and her young son made their way to the surface from the ruins of Denis. A mother, Anna, grieving for the loss of her soulmate, and her son, Gen, angry at his mother for, he believed, leaving his father behind. We learned about Gen's adolescent life and his all-consuming anger towards his mother for what he perceived as her part in the fall of Denis and in his father's death. Basically, she was the root cause of his world having fallen apart. Instead of learning patience, he was impatient, choosing easy paths, even though they may not be the correct ones. Where his paths would become blocked, he chose to use brute force to overcome his obstacles rather than use reason and logic. We learned of his son, Atris, and of Anna's second attempt to raise a good and decent child, teaching him to be observant of his surroundings, even of the bad things that occur as a result of his experiments. We learned how, when Atris was 14 years old, his father returned to the cleft to take him to Denis, where Gen intended to use Atris as an assistant, together writing ages to rebuild what Gen had perceived as the glory of Denis. We learned of Atris' first trek to Denis, and the beginnings of his lessons from Gen on how ages are created. We saw the first of many confrontations between father and son, how Gen took Atris to show him some of his ages, and ending up at Gen's 37th age. We saw Atris learning the art, and of the relationship between the words written in an age's descriptive book and the end result, and of his first book, which he named Inception, in which he applied the rules of writing that he had learned, writing it from scratch, not copying phrases found in other descriptive books, like his father was doing. We saw the beginnings of the son's abilities begin to outpace the father's. We saw how Gen's lack of understanding of the art led to his making his 37th age unstable, his desecration of Atris's age of inception, and his burning the book of his 37th age because of his inability and lack of desire due to his impatience to fix it. We watched as Atris realized the depth of his father's madness and tried to escape, only to be caught in the tunnels on his way to the surface and locked in a large room in the mansion on Kavir, the only items therein being a pen, a bottle of writer's ink, and the descriptive book to Gen's 5th age that we know as Riven. Atris caused a small cave-in around the only door out of that room, effectively imprisoning him permanently. Then, studying that descriptive book, ensuring that it was not some sort of trap, he decided to link there anyway. We saw Atris' first experience with the heat-reactive algae in the water on Riven, his near drowning, and his being nursed back to health by two Rivenese, Karel and Erlar, and their cousin Katrin, whom Atris mispronounced as Catherine, and of Gen's plan to marry Katrin. We saw Atris learn of Catherine's ability to write as they visited her first age, which was in the shape of a Taurus, and of his father's plan to marry Catherine, and her plea to help her fix Riven and prevent her impending marriage. Last week, we saw some of Atris's experiments, Catherine's second age, that used a completely different style, which she called Mist, and Atris's decision for his final confrontation with Gen. Tonight's story opens in the Denis year of 9429, approximately 1773 A.D., the year of the Boston Tea Party, which occurred on October 10th of that year. A truly busy year in Atris's life. After reluctantly leaving Catherine on her age of mist, Atris linked back to Denis to enact his final solution for the problem of his father. He needed to ensure that Gen would be trapped in that age with no means of escape. The fates of 1,000 worlds and millions of innocent people depended on his success. Not to mention that Gen would surely realize that Catherine had betrayed him. As a result, Catherine's life was also in his hands. He wanted nothing more than to be with Catherine, now on Mist. Before he left, they had walked along the water's edge in that age. She asked him to tell her about himself, that she knew almost nothing about him. For instance, what was his grandmother like? His first thought was, "She's just like you." The thought made him look down. Then he dug into his knapsack and pulled out his journal. He gave it to her to help her understand him, in case he couldn't make it back. Shortly afterwards, he left her side, linking back to Denis. Unfortunately, he was more than a little distracted. His heart was heavy, resigned to his fate. The only way he could be sure that he, Catherine, and the universe would be safe from his father was to kill him outright. Unfortunately, the guilt would weigh on his conscience, thereby poisoning the rest of Atris's life. The only solution that he could see was to burn both Gen's and his own linking book, trapping them both on Riven. If he could not have her, at least he would have a remembrance of her. His mind started to wander for a bit. He started to wonder what his mother had looked like. Immediately, he heard Anna's voice in his head saying that she looked like you, Atris. That seemed to brighten his spirit some. He opened Riven's Corman and copied the phrases used for his experiments into the Riven descriptive book to stabilize the orbit of Riven's moon, hoping that that in turn would help stabilize the age. Finished, he opened the book to the descriptive panel and linked. After arriving on Riven in the meadow, he made his way towards Gen's linking book. After securing it, he went down to the beach where his book lay hidden. Meanwhile, no sooner had Atris linked back to Riven from Denis when Catherine linked into the room. She picked up the mist book and placed it into her knapsack. She sat down at the desk and opened up the book of Riven to its last page. A second person linked into the room and stood behind Catherine. The second person watched as Catherine took Atris's pen, dipped it into the inkwell, and, with encouragement from the newcomer, began to write. Meanwhile, back on Riven, Atris collected his father's linking book, then headed back to the beach where his own book was. He set a small fire on the beach. He would drop Gen's book on the fire, making sure that the flames had caught the book. Then he would hold his own book over the fire and link back to Denis, his linking book dropping onto the flames, thereby destroying Gen's last means of egress from this age. At least, that was the plan. Plans have a way of unexpectedly changing. Atris's was no different. The last thing that Atris remembered was crawling into the little cave where his book was hidden. When he came to, he was tied to a stake that was out in the open near the temple. Atris' attempts at stealth when he linked here from Denis were in vain. His father either had seen him, or one of his minions did and reported back to Gen. Either way, Atris was in a bit of a pickle. Gen came up behind him and whispered in his ear. "So, you are back with us, Atris. I thought for a while that I had lost you. It seems I do not know my own strength sometimes." Gen turned to face the Rivenese who were gathered there. Pointing to a small group that had been bound and placed on their knees, he said that there seemed to be a small group who decided to help his enemies. In that small group were Catherine's cousins, Karel and Erlar. Continuing, Gen said, "To nurse this impostor." Gen turned and pointed to Atris. "Who calls himself my son." He went on to tell everyone there that, because of the actions of a few, that he would punish them all by causing great tides, as well as turning the sun black and destroying the great tree. Atris called out to the islanders, "No, he's wrong. I've fixed it. All of the weaknesses in the book, I've put them right. I've—" Gen turned to face Atris with a hideous grin of triumph. "Well done, Atris. I knew I could count on you. I shall be most interested in reading the changes you have so graciously crafted for me." Then, stepping away from his son, Gen directed the nearby guild members to untie him. Gen turned back to the crowd and addressed them. "People of the Fifth Age, you are most fortunate. I have asked my servant here to do my bidding, and he has done so. Your world is safe now. Yet, if you transgress again, if I find that any among you have sought to help my enemies, then the full weight of my wrath shall fall on you. I shall destroy your world just as I created it. But let us not dwell upon that now. Now is the time to look forward and to celebrate, for tonight, at sunset, I shall take a daughter of the age to be my bride and rule the 1,000 worlds with me." Atris, the fight gone from him, felt beaten. It seemed that Catherine had betrayed him, and his father had won in the end. There was nothing more he could do. Gen turned back to Atris and whispered, "Don't think that I've finished with you, boy. You have caused me an inordinate amount of trouble, and I shall not forget that. As far as I am concerned, you are no longer my son. Do you understand me? I do not need you any more, Atreus. You have served your purpose." Looking at Catherine, he mused that perhaps his next son would not fail him. For Atreus, it was a nightmare. "Catherine, my beloved Catherine," he thought to himself. At that, the ground began to tremble, then shake violently. "No." Gen looked around him with a wild-eyed expression. "No!" A crack opened up in front of the temple steps. The sky slowly turned black, and the temple roof caved in. Cracks began opening up all over the meadow. The area was underlit from the red and orange glow emanating from the fissures. Atreus went for the two linking books, but Gen grabbed a spear and blocked his way. Atreus rushed his father, and almost succeeded in subduing his father. Unfortunately, Gen soon gained the upper hand. "You are useless," Gen said. "I should have killed you long ago." "Then kill me." As Gen raised his spear, someone called out his name from behind. It was Catherine. She held up the two linking books in her hands over one of the glowing red cracks. "Harm him, and I'll throw the books into the crack." Gen didn't believe she would, so she dropped the first one in. It exploded in flames from the intense heat. Like that, it was gone. Gen and Atreus gasped. He tossed the spear aside, calling for Catherine to use reason. "You want the linking book?" she asked. "Then have it." She tossed the book high into the air and over the crack. Gen lunged for it, but it was too late. It sailed into the crack as well. When he got back up and looked around, both Atreus and Catherine were gone. The temple collapsed in on itself, and Gen thought he could see a giant dagger sticking out of the ground in the ruins. Just then, a giant crack of lightning struck the top of the great tree. It exploded into flames. It showed Atreus and Catherine running off in the distance. Atreus was confused and asked Catherine to tell him what was happening. She told him that everything was going as we had planned. We? He thought to himself. She explained. "Anna and I." His mouth fell open. She led him on to another narrow crack, but one that glowed blue instead of red. The surrounding debris seemed to be drawn into this strange crack, this fissure. Inside of it, he could see an expanse of stars. She knelt and pulled out her mist book. "Did you ever wonder what it would be like to go swimming out among the stars? We could fall into the night and be cradled by stars and still return to the place where we began." And with that, she linked. At that moment, Gen arrived with a rather large rock in his hand, demanding that Atreus give him that book. Atreus refused. Softening his demeanor, Gen let the rock fall. He tried to appeal to Atreus, citing the fact that they were father and son. "But I thought you disowned me," Atreus said. "Or did I hear that wrong too?" Gen apologized, saying that he was angry. He tried to reason and cajole his son, citing all the knowledge that he had to give to Atreus. Atreus responded by saying that anything useful he learned was taught to him by Anna. Gen said that he loved Atreus, saying that there was still a chance for them, father and son. Atreus asked Gen what kind of love binds and imprisons. Atreus then gave his father a little speech of his own, how love had been destroyed little by little, with the desecration of his age of inception, with the burning of the age 37 book. You can stay here and play God with your little creations. With that, Atreus stepped back into the fissure, and, as he was falling, he linked to the Age of Mist. Later, Atreus wrote in his journal the following: "Only a remarkable woman would have done what Anna did, following us down through that labyrinth of tunnels and broken ways into Denis. She had known, of course, that Gen would not keep his word, had known what I, in my innocence, could not have guessed, that my father was not merely untrustworthy, but mad. All those years I spent on Kvir, she had kept a distant eye on me, making sure that I came to no harm at my father's hands, while she awaited the moment of my realization. Anna saw me flee Kvir and sought to find me in the tunnels once again, but Gen had got there first. Even then she would have intervened, but for the mute. Seeing them carry me back, unconscious, to Kvir, she had known she had to act. That evening she had gone to Kvir and, risking all, had entered my father's study, meaning to confront him. But Gen was not there. It was Catherine she met. Catherine who, after that first moment of shock and surprise, had chosen to trust and help her. I should have known at once that Mist was not Catherine's. But how was I to know otherwise? I had thought Anna lost, lost forever. And how was I to know that, just as I made my preparations, so the two of them made theirs, pooling their talents, Anna's experience and Catherine's intuitive genius, to craft those seemingly cataclysmic events on age 5 in such a way that, after a time, they would reverse themselves, making Catherine's former home, now Gen's prison, stable once more. I realized the moment I fell into the fissure that the book would not be destroyed as I had planned. It continued falling into that starry expanse, of which I had only a fleeting glimpse. I have tried to speculate where it might have landed, but I must admit that such conjecture is futile. Still, questions about whose hands might one day hold my missed book are unsettling to me. I know my apprehensions might never be allayed, and so I close, realizing that perhaps the ending has not yet been written. Please join us next week as we relive the events from the Game of Mist. The end. Thank you all for coming tonight, and to those of you at home watching this video. And time to end the story right now.